Hello, and welcome to Spilling the Milk. This is the podcast where we talk about what it's really like to breastfeed a baby, and we leave space for moms to share their breastfeeding journey and maybe process things that they haven't even had a chance to yet. My guest today is Kortney. We met in a professional networking group because she has recently transitioned from being a full-time classroom teacher and band director to a freelance instructional designer, a career path that is near and dear to my heart. Kortney and I have lots in common. We could probably talk for hours, but in our conversation today, we did focus on her breastfeeding journey and specifically what that looked like once she returned to teaching at school and wanting to still pump and provide some breast milk for her babies. Please enjoy my conversation with Kortney. So you're familiar with the podcast. It's pretty much, giving space for moms to share about their own breastfeeding experience. And it seems like everyone has like a unique story to tell.
Yeah.
So if you want to just start by maybe introducing yourself, telling us about your child, and you mentioned, that you could speak to the teacher experience, which is really cool. So yeah, just start by introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, sure. So I'm Kortney, and I just left teaching in January of this year. So I haven't been out of the classroom for very long. Now I'm working from home as an instructional designer. I have two little kids, and one of them, I was a part of the 2 Under 2 club for about 3 weeks. So my son just turned 3, and my daughter just turned a year old, just in the last couple of months. So breastfeeding them, my son, was a struggle, a challenge kind of the whole time. Had mastitis like 3 or 4 times at least. He was born just a couple of days before COVID hit the country. So we were dealing with it all in lockdown, So then when my daughter came around, it's like, if we have to use formula, we will, but I'm going to try it. And it was just a totally different experience. Breastfeeding her was so easy and it was a breeze the whole time. So I don't know why he was so complicated, but he was.
That's interesting.
So I guess that just kind of goes to show that even with the same mom, each kid has a totally different experience.
Definitely. Well, and you are part of a very unique group of people. I think I know you're like my third person that I know personally, who had their baby right before COVID it's just, I think you guys have had a pretty unique experience because you had the added stress of the isolation and the not being able to reach out for help as much as most people usually can.
Yeah, that was kind of crazy. So I was lucky that my mom came and stayed with us the first week. So I guess he was born about a week or two before everything really got crazy. So she was here for that first week. My grandparents both got to come and meet him before everything really shut down. But then they didn't see him again until he was 5 or 6 months old. And we were, dealing with it all, just me and my husband. So yeah, that was a lot.
It is a lot. And so you mentioned mastitis, I guess what other challenges? So did you end up switching to formula with him?
So we kind of did a little bit of both. I actually breastfed him until he was 11 months old. But I did have mastitis 3 or 4 times. And so when we first started, he didn't have a great latch and I was using nipple shields. And I think I used those a little bit too long. And that's part of how I got mastitis the first time because it wasn't emptying all the way using the nipple shields. And then it was COVID. When I got COVID, I didn't have COVID very badly, but it caused mastitis flare-ups, horrible. I hadn't dealt with it in months, but I just suddenly had 102 fever on Christmas Eve. Oh, and of course, nowhere is open except for the emergency room on Christmas Eve. So that was fun. It was just really weird how having COVID seemed to cause my body to, I don't know, it caused mastitis somehow, which was really weird. And that was the worst like symptom I had. I didn't really have any of the COVID symptoms.
Yeah.
It just caused me to have really bad mastitis, which was nuts.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if other people had a similar experience. I mean, again, it's like a very specific subset of people.
Yeah.
Going through this.
And then like when I went back to teaching, so I was already planned to be out because he was born in February. So my maternity leave was already supposed to be through the summer. I had planned it where I could take off until the next fall. But then, of course, COVID came around and shut down the schools anyways. Right. So nobody returned until the fall. But when I went back, I knew that I didn't really have the time in my schedule to pump every 2 or 3 hours like he would be eating. So we kind of weaned him down and started doing some formula as well during the day. So I still pumped when I went back to school, but only like during lunch. And eventually weaned myself off of pumping altogether because I just hated it. It was just not fun. So he did do formula quite a bit from like 6 to 12 months. He would just do formula at daycare. But just then because that's what was easiest for us.
Yeah. Well, and then so were you then nursing like morning and night?
Yeah. Yeah. So I nursed him when we were together and just did formula when we weren't. And that worked out for us. It was just easier on me mentally because I hated pumping so much. And I unfortunately didn't have very supportive administrators that were willing to give me the time in my day that I needed to be able to do it the way I should. So I just cut it down so that I only had to pump once during the day, and that was mostly for myself to really avoid mastitis.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a long time to go.
Yeah, we just kind of became at peace with doing formula at daycare, and that was what worked best for us.
Yeah, it sounds like a nice balance. And I do like that you sort of illustrate the logistics of how a baby that age might do sort of half and half. I mean, thinking about a teacher's schedule, like you barely have time to pee multiple times a day, let alone like a 20-minute plus pumping session. I don't know, like, do you have any teacher friends that have successfully pumped like multiple times a day in their schedule?
So I haven't had very many friends who had to pump at work just because I worked with mostly like older people or people who decided not to pump. Right. That were just not breastfeeding at all. Right. I managed to do it twice. So this with my daughter, like I said, she was much easier, just kind of all around. And I also discovered the amazing like wearable pumps. Yeah. And that was a life changer.
Ooh, yeah. Tell me about those. That's new. I never did that.
I could sit at my desk and like not have to worry about somebody walking in on me or whatever, because it was all just inside my bra. Right. Yeah, and it was amazing. So I used that with my daughter when I was at work and was able to actually pump usually 3 times a day. So I had my planning first thing in the morning, and I would pump during that, and then during lunch, and then right after school. So I was a band director, so I had after school rehearsals a lot of days a week. And with the wearable pumps, I could even, if I managed to like get them in before the band kids got into the room, while they were all like hanging out, coming in, putting their instruments together and stuff, they had no idea I was even pumping because the room was so noisy they couldn't hear it anyways because the band was so loud. So I mean, I would just put those in and pump for like the first 15 minutes of band, and then just take a little break and dump them out, and the kids had no idea. The ones that did figure it out were like, okay, cool, she's making milk for her daughter. You know, they didn't make a big deal out of it. So the wearable pump was really a life changer with the pumping at work.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, honestly, it's kind of like you're normalizing it for them. Like I hope the next generation is a little bit more normalized like that.
Yeah. So I had 4 practice rooms in my band room, and one of them during that whole season of life was Mama Ross's room. Yeah. And so that was where I had a mini fridge in there, and that's where all my pump parts would be after I washed them, and I'd lay them out to dry. And so they all knew what it was and what I was doing. And I mean, I was teaching middle and high school, so, most of them weren't totally weirded out by it.
Yeah, but that is sort of a special case that since you have that room, like most, like if you're a math teacher, you might not have that extra room. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think a lot of teachers struggle because they don't have the space to do it. You know, they don't have a good place to go, and people are always walking in on them in their classroom. Even over the cow signs you hang over the lock, people still let themselves in. It's like, I've seen a lot of struggles with that in different like mom groups I'm a part of. So yeah, I was kind of lucky to have that separate room within my room that I could go to.
You mentioned mom groups that you're part of. Is that something online or in person, or what's the mix?
In Facebook. So Generation Lactation is one that I'm on in Facebook, and they have a lot of really great like breastfeeding advice and just kind of celebrations. They have these little graphics you can share when you've made it to a certain, you know, I made it a month, I made it 6 months, I made it through mastitis or whatever. So it's kind of a fun little like just community of specifically people who are breastfeeding. And it's ran by a couple of lactation specialists. And then I was also a part of a music teacher mommies group on Facebook that, you know, we could kind of gripe about the specific problems with music teaching. And, you know, like I had to go to all day Saturday band competitions, and like pumping on the bus and trying to figure out where to pump at the competition and how to get away from kids. And so there's a lot of like logistics there that I would talk through with other music teacher moms. Like, how have you done this? How do you store breast milk for 12 hours a day when you're with students on a field trip?
Exactly. Oh my gosh. I love Facebook groups. You can find like your exact niche of people that you want to connect with. Yeah. The wearable pump. I mean, that's pretty new in the last like 5-ish years. I feel like it's come to popularity. Did you have a specific brand that you liked?
I can't remember. I think mine was a Willow. It was whatever my insurance covered, honestly.
So your insurance covered the wearable. That's good to know.
Yeah. Okay. So it covered like most of it. You know, insurance would give you a like certain amount towards certain ones. I think I ended up paying like $50 for it.
Did you still have the other one from the first baby?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So some people struggle with the wearable pumps with them not emptying them well enough. Yeah. So I was really worried about that. But I still had my like traditional pump from my son, and I would use it if I felt like I was getting engorged or something, because I was terrified of getting mastitis. Of course. And I didn't have it at all with her. Like 4 times with my first kid, and then didn't have to deal with it at all with my second kid. So I don't know if she was just a much more efficient feeder or what, or if we just figured out the schedule better. Or, I don't know. I don't feel like we really did anything drastically different other than not using the nipple shields at all. But yeah, she was totally different. I was like a major overproducer with both kids. Especially with my son. So I think maybe my body just figured it out a little bit better the second time. I don't know.
But my experience was the opposite. So I didn't get mastitis with the first one, and I did use a nipple shield. And then with the second one, I got mastitis several times, and I didn't use a nipple shield.
That's crazy. So it's just, I don't know. It's like there was no rhyme or reason to it.
Well, but I do. So I'm thinking more and more about, I've heard it's like when your body gets run down, you're much more likely. So like the first one, you were in pandemic times, and like you probably had a constant level of stress like we all did, that maybe didn't help anything. And then with your second, you know, things were different and maybe just less, like a lower baseline stress level. I don't know. I'm making that up, but and like for me,
that's true.
Having a second kid was more stressful. Like, how do I take care of my toddler and my newborn? I think I didn't allow myself the rest time that maybe I did when I just had the first one.
Yeah, that's something that's a lot more difficult when you have 2 kids. Everybody's like, sleep when baby sleeps. Yeah, that's easy when you only have baby.
Yes. And they end up
you have a 2-year-old running around at the same time. It doesn't work so well.
Yeah. And I remember at one point it was like they had complete opposite nap schedules where like one would just be falling asleep, but the other one was waking up. So like you never had time.
Yes, that's how mine worked out too. When the baby was in like 2 naps a day and the toddler's in 1 nap a day, it was like somebody was sleeping all day. But never at the same time.
Never at the same time. Oh my goodness. It is kind of crazy. Like just the intensity. It's, if you look at your whole life, it's really just a short blip of time. But when you're in it, it is like just getting through the day is.
Yes. Yeah. Just like, did I shower? I don't know. Probably.
Probably not.
Probably not. But the kids are alive, so it's all good.
Yeah. Did I eat? I don't remember if I ate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, you do bring up the specific situation of teachers and pumping. Something I hadn't thought about a ton yet, but I don't even know when there would be the time to fit it in.
Yeah, it was hard. And I know if you have like a really great administrator, that some teachers will have like aides that'll come in and watch their classroom for long enough for them to go pump at certain times of the day. And like, if you can make that work. Yeah. But right now there's such a shortage of employees in general in the schools, not just teachers, that it's hard to even come up with that extra person to relieve you. So you have to kind of figure it out with how it works with your schedule. And that's just hard. Yeah. And that's part of why I just didn't deal with it the first time.
Right.
With my son. I just knew that it wasn't going to work with the schedule I had, and it was going to be more stress on me than it was worth. He was already like 6 months old anyway. So I was like, you know what, if this is the end, if it doesn't work for him to, breastfeed part of the day and have formula the other part of the day, like that's okay. I've made it to 6 months, I was happy with that. Yeah. But it was fine. He didn't have any trouble switching back and forth between formula and breast milk or bottle and breast milk.
That's great.
It was fine with him. And it worked out well for me. We still got that little bit of bonding, but I didn't have to worry about the stress of keeping up with all the pump parts. And
well, that was my
question. Breast milk at daycare or not? And,
right. So clearly it was important enough to you to preserve some of the feeding, some of the nursing sessions throughout the day. So I was going to ask you, like, what do you consider the benefits beyond just like the calories that the baby is getting?
Yeah. So I just felt like it was a really good, like, bonding for us. I loved breastfeeding, even though it hurts like the dickens in the beginning. And I dealt with mastitis 4 times. I loved breastfeeding them. And I loved that like special time together, and that I was the only one that could do that. I guess that's a little bit selfish sounding, but no one else could do that for him.
Well, you're the only
one
that
to keep that.
Go through the mastitis too. So it's like the good with the bad.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So I wanted to keep that little moment for us in the mornings and in the evenings. And at 11 months, when he got sick with COVID, that was his first Christmas present to us. He brought it home from daycare.
Of course.
When he got sick, he was so congested that he was just done with it. He didn't want to breastfeed anymore because he couldn't really latch well and breathe at the same time. Yeah. So that was the end of our journey there. He just gave up on me. And I was like, well, okay.
That's interesting.
We almost made it to a year.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of moms want to know, like, what does weaning look like? And it can look many different ways. And that's one example. It's like a life event will happen where it just sort of naturally sort of phases out. So that's a helpful example for other people to hear. It was 11 months. You're maybe close anyway. And then the being stuffy was like, I can't breathe.
Yeah, he just gave up. I was like, well, okay. We did have to kind of do a really like mindful weaning process before I went back to school. So I knew that I was only going to want to pump that one time at a certain time during the day, and that we were going to put him on formula when he was at daycare. So about the beginning of July, I started working towards that schedule. We introduced formula to him to make sure he would take it. We started making dad give him bottles, some instead of just mom, to help the daycare workers be able to feed him without a major meltdowns. Yeah. And then I also had to work on slowly spreading out the feeding sessions or the pumping sessions so that my body would adjust to feed him at 7:30 and then don't get the pump until 11:30 and then don't see him again until like 4:30. So I had to really slowly and gradually work myself towards that schedule over the course of about a month. Yeah, you're right. Because at that point, they are still feeding quite often. So I like the phrase you use, mindful weaning. But then at 11 months, he was already eating less frequently. Your body was making less. You had already been on that schedule. So it was less of a big deal. Yeah, it wasn't really, because by then I had already dropped the pumping during the day at work. My body had just adjusted to that. So we were really only feeding right before bedtime. That
Mm-hmm.
was the only, and then he dropped that and it wasn't a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
I, for a few days had to do a little bit of expressing in the shower or, just kind of relieve that pressure in the evening. But
Yep.
it didn't take much for my body to adjust after he kind of gave up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a helpful description of kind of like the gentle easing off and the, dropping one feeding at a time, letting your body, I mean, really you're letting your supply sort of readjust to a new norm and then readjust to a new norm.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. And I had to be super careful because I had mastitis so many times and was so such an overproducer. I had to just drop like one a day and spread them out just a little bit farther each day. It was a super slow, meticulous process.
Yeah, that's helpful. Well, I mean, you're a teacher, so you're probably a planner. So you like work backwards from the first day of school. You're like, all right, this is the goal on the first day of school. So we're going to work backwards. We're going to have a plan.
There's like a whole schedule. Yeah.
There's a schedule. Mm-hmm. Well, it's really helpful for you to share your experience. And then with your daughter, did you say you weaned her a few months ago?
Yeah, about around 11 months for her too. And part of that was I was just done. She got to where she was like clawing and thrashing around and I didn't feel like she was really caring for it anymore. And then finally I was like, I'm just done fighting you.
Yeah.
So she didn't give up quite as peacefully as my son did. But she told me in other ways that she was done.
Mm-hmm. And was it gradual with her as well, where you were already down?
Yeah, I was only really breastfeeding her in the morning and at night as well, because I was pumping during the day. And we dropped the morning one first, and I would keep nursing her to sleep at night. And then we slowly just kind of dropped that one too and replaced it with a bottle.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
I think you said you listened to some of the other Spilling the Milk episodes. Was there anything that jumped out to you that you heard?
Yeah, so I was listening to one with I can't remember who you were talking to, but she said that in the shower she got curious if she could still express breast milk. So I was curious too and tried it in the bath earlier, and it took like 2 seconds to get milk, and I haven't breastfed in 5 months. So it's just kind of crazy how long that like sticks around. I had never even thought to try. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, I think I had a similar experience, and it was weird. It was like, oh, if I had to feed a baby, could I do it today? Like, okay.
Yeah. Like, all right.
It is a superpower. I mean, I remember having the thought, I was like, what if there's an emergency and there's like a hungry baby that isn't even mine, but like, would I feed the baby? Like,
yeah. Yeah. Like, could I just feed them? I think I could. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, back in the day, maybe in other cultures still, there's wet nurses. Like that was their job.
Yeah. Yeah. And then like if you adopt, I've read like you can relactate years later if you adopt, or I even read in one culture, the grandmother, I don't remember what culture this was. I wish I did. The grandmother nurses to help the mom out. So grandmothers will relactate years later, generation later to feed their grandchild.
Wow. Like, that is so interesting. That would be helpful.
Yeah. I saw that was one of the like random things that was shared in that breastfeeding group when I was breastfeeding at 2:00 in the morning. It's like, oh, if only my mom could do that.
Yes, because that is the hard part. It's like it's all on you. You're the only one who can do it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was crazy. Like I didn't know that was, physically possible. But I guess it is.
Women are amazing at all stages of life.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything that we didn't cover or any advice you have for maybe moms who are pregnant and they're about to breastfeed for the first time? Like, what would you love to tell them?
Just stick with it. Like, it is hard in the beginning. If you really want to do it, though, stick with it. Give it a couple of weeks for your body to adjust. But it hurts in the beginning, and I don't feel like anybody told me that. Like, everybody talks about, it's all rainbows and sunshines and it's so healthy for your baby and it's wonderful bonding experience. And that's all true. But nobody warned me that it was going to hurt.
Yes.
And that my nipples were going to be cracked and dry and I'd have to use nipple butter and, all this stuff. Like nobody tells you that. But stick with it. But also like advocate for yourself. If something's not going right, you trust your instincts, because if it's hurting too much, something's probably wrong. The latch isn't right, or the baby is tongue tied, or there's so many things that could be going wrong. So advocate for yourself and get help if you need that help.
Yeah, that's great.
And kind of on that topic, but a little not related to breastfeeding, but I had a lot of trouble, having intercourse afterwards too. I had a lot of pain in that area and ended up having to go through pelvic floor therapy, but waited way too long to get help for that. I mean, it was like 6 or 7 months postpartum before I even went to my OBGYN and was like, hey, this hurts, something's not right, and pelvic floor therapy helped dramatically and relatively quickly. And I was like, why didn't I do this sooner?
Was it covered by insurance?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
It was all covered. Yeah.
That's great.
So that was just another one of those things I didn't know. Nobody ever talked about that. I just thought it was normal.
Right.
But no, it wasn't normal to not be able to have any sort of intercourse 6 or 7 months later. So
yeah,
that was just another one of those things nobody ever mentioned. Nobody ever told me. I had no idea. And so I just kind of kept it to myself. And then of course it was also during COVID. So extra doctor's appointments weren't the top of everybody's list. And
that's so true. No, I think you bring up a great point. It's not talked about. It's probably talked about even less than breastfeeding. But I remember learning that in France, most women postpartum, like as routine, go to pelvic floor therapy. Like it is covered by insurance and it's just part of their culture. And here it's like pretty rare or just nobody talks about it.
I had never even heard of it until like I finally went to my doctor 6 or 7 months later. She's like, oh, you probably should try this. What is that? What does that mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like it should just be a part of our postpartum like routine. Body has gone through such major changes.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
That we go to physical therapy for every other like, minor surgery or problem or whatever. Like, why not do it for childbirth too? I don't know.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah. Well, thank you. That's great advice for new moms. Thank you so much for chatting with me today and for sharing your experience.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
I would like to thank Kortney for being my guest today. I appreciate her being open and honest and vulnerable and giving us a peek into her experience. In our conversation, we touched on the importance of pelvic floor health and pelvic floor therapy and how that might even be talked about less than breastfeeding. And in exciting news, my next episode of the podcast is going to focus specifically on this issue, and we're going to do a deep dive with an expert on the topic. So I cannot wait for that. Please subscribe and check back in for that episode coming up soon. In the meantime, I invite you to go to empoweredbumpsandboobs.com and subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date on all the happenings on the podcast and with our breastfeeding bootcamp that launches very soon. Thank you so much for listening. And if you know of someone who might also enjoy these conversations, please share the podcast with them. Please leave us a review so other people can find us on their favorite podcast app. And be well.